going to try to play the advertisement, which could go horribly wrong, but we'll see. I can see
Hopefully, yeah.
somebody else from Leeds is here as well. Corin's here. Hi, Corin.
Hi, sorry, I haven't plugged my camera in, so I just have to shout through my laptop.
All right. Hi, Nestor.
Oh, good afternoon. Okay.
So this is generally 20 minutes plus questions. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, I might go a few minutes over, but I'll keep my time.
Yeah, you're going to have 20 minutes for the whole presentation, and well, and then we'll have around 10 minutes for the questions.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
So Nestor, are you based in Colombia? Or are you in?
No, I'm here in Bogotá. Yes, but I'm here in Colombia, but in Bogotá.
Right.
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 Yeah.
It's been a really good conference so far. I've really enjoyed all the things that I've heard.
It's been really interesting. That's right. Very, very nice. Okay, we're gonna get started. So I'm gonna start with a very brief introduction and Dr. Haynes, and then we'll get started, right?
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nestor Buitrago, and I'm going to be your chairman here for this room session. And it's my honor to introduce Dr. Haynes Collins from University of Leeds and his presentation on Coca-Cola and the endangered Mije language, okay, or how not to fight for social justice. So as you can see, Dr. Collins' research interests are intercultural practices within small cultures and how institutional and media discourses mobilize the concept of culture and interculturality to serve ideological agendas. So Dr. Collins, you can get started. As I mentioned before, you have 20 minutes for your presentation. I'll let you know when we are about to get done in the final 2 minutes, just as a warning message, all right?
Yep, that sounds great. Thanks a lot. Let's see. Oh, okay. I need to share my screen. There we go. Okay, so everybody can see the screens, yes? Okay, we've got quite a small audience, and I know many of the people in the audience. So I won't give a big introduction, but yes, my name's Haynes Collins. I work at the University of Leeds, and today I want to highlight a case of what I see as othering discourses that have been constructed about an indigenous group through both an indigenous group and a minority language. And that's done through a particular advertisement by Coca-Cola. And I think that the first reason for doing this is just to highlight the possibilities, the pedagogical possibilities of actually bringing advertisements into the classroom, using critical discourse analysis or a multimodal critical discourse analysis to analyze these advertisements, drawing on the work of people like Faircloth and Wodak. But it is a way to sort of stimulate, I think, discussion and to get students to work out their own positioning with respect to these advertisements. But I think this particular case raises a few other questions as well, rather than just kind of being an odd example and an example of pedagogical value. I think it raises questions about interculturality as well, and about intercultural dialogue, which I hope to pick up on. So I'm kind of fascinated with the everyday, and I think, I asked students on this particular module where this example has come from. I asked them to bring advertisements to class that touch upon the notion of culture, or maybe an advertisement where a company is trying to run a social justice campaign. And these advertisements are really quite ubiquitous. I think students never really have a problem finding these type of examples, and we see them every day. So just recently, I was walking in my hometown, went to a local supermarket and noticed here you can see the supermarket has adopted Black History Month as part of their promotion. And so this is an example of this kind of ubiquity where I think these kind of corporate messages have a way of just kind of washing over us. But I think they're worth paying attention to and questioning. So in this particular one, I think this one is somewhat ambiguous. I mean, I think it is one where we can certainly ask questions about. I think it can stimulate discussions within the particular supermarket of this example of Sainsbury's. For Black History Month, they have a few different stands going under this theme. This is one photo that I took. I think we can certainly ask questions about the kind of the Orientalist imagery that's going on, I think, and also the selection of let's display particular herbs and spices in connection with Black History Month, as opposed to maybe concentrating on something like achievements. So I still think this particular example falls into it's more of an ambiguous category, but the example that I'm going to show you today, I personally, I think it's more offensive, but I'm often surprised by the different reactions that I see. And that's another element, I think, of the presentation. It's just that one can be surprised by how people react to these different messages. So let me turn to the example that I want to focus on today by Coca-Cola. So, I mean, we can see as products move around from place to place, there's often a kind of a process, a localization process that goes on. And I think that the borderline between what's localization and what is just something that's, selling stereotypes is often quite blurred. And Coca-Cola is up there with, a number of multinational corporations that really just pumping out these different advertisements with various degrees of effectiveness, I suppose, at selling their products, but also varying degrees of I think, othering discourse as well. Yes, and I think there's a history as well within Latin America of Coca-Cola playing on these kind of stereotypical imagery. So the example that I brought today, although it's a little bit old, it's around 5 years old. I thought it was appropriate for this particular conference. And it focuses on a particular village in the state of Oaxaca. It's in Tototepec, and it is trying to raise awareness of the discrimination in which indigenous people in Mexico, in that region, face, particularly when speaking their language. There's actually a family of languages within that area. 3 to 8 different kind of, I think, Mixe languages, around 100,000 speakers, mainly in Oaxaca. And in the particular village, I think the language is Ayuk. So rather than describe the commercial, I'm going to try to hopefully show it to you, and then we'll go from there. And if not, I'm going to have to describe it to you, which may be a little bit more difficult, but let's see if we can show it to you. Okay. If you're able to see this once I play it and hear it, if you could just give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. Okay, here we go. Okay, that seemed to work. Yes, that's good news. That means I don't have to try to describe the commercial and sing the theme tune. So I think it's a number of things to point out, and I think pick up on. So it starts with the image here, which is stating that 81.6% of indigenous feel I think discriminated against for speaking their own language. I love that it's 81.6% as well. It gives that kind of scientific ring because it's the 0.6 as well. And we can pick up on things like the music as well. At the beginning, when it's giving the statistic, there's a kind of a slight intro to the music, which is a little bit, I think, less swelling and emotional. And as soon as the group of sort of teenage or young kids arrive and descend on the village, suddenly we've got this swelling of music. The tree is constructed out of the wood that they painted red and plastic coat tops, so when they spin them, the light comes on. And it's got messages at the end asking viewers to open their hearts and to end their prejudice. So we've seen the commercial, so I can skip through these images. So there was a lot of media criticism when the ad came out. It was described as, tone deaf, racist, and then as featuring a kind of a white savior. The thing that I think pops out to me is that it kind of features what Holliday would call a West's Steward discourse, which says that modernity and progress resides only in the West. It's given rise to Orientalism, the notion that non-Western cultures are deficient and lack characteristics which can only be learned in the West. I'll come back to the second half of this quote in just a moment, because I think there's two sides of this idea of West's Steward discourse. The other thing that I think was interesting for me was to see the work or the comments by Daniel Calvillo, who really picked up on this, the youth in this video, and said, that the product is being marketed not exclusively at youth, but that it's selling a sense of belonging. And the youth that descend into the village drinking Coca-Cola and then constructing the Christmas tree, Calvillo writes that they're part of a subculture that appear to be countercultural, but they're actually defending individualism, competition, and that deep down is nothing more than a kind of a ruthless and snobby form of contemporary capitalism. And he goes on to say, Alejandro Calvillo, sorry, that the ad actually is deepening the prejudice, the discrimination, and the racism by making the indigenous people passive in their own community, lacking in happiness, which must come from the outside, comes from consuming a beverage, and having the urban youth make a Christmas tree that's not part of their tradition. There's a condescending attitude towards the indigenous people with character of superiority. It reproduces racist stereotypes and subordination. So personally, I have to say, I couldn't agree more with Calvillo and his interpretation. And so I kind of thought, well, okay, so far so good, that's the end of the story. But I think there's more to it, and that's thinking a little bit about different reactions. So the video that I just played, it was actually taken from a website called the Asian Republic website. And when I had a closer look at that and the comments there, I pulled these comments, which are really, I think, typical of most of the comments, where people who view the ad were saying, seriously, I can't see what's being criticized. Can someone please point it out to me? There's nothing wrong. It's very nice. It's caring. We need more like this. And then the final one, which I think is the best. I see nothing offensive. I'm offended that Mexicans or anyone is offended, which, I find really difficult to believe. So I think this goes back to that other side of the West's Steward discourse. Let me just go back to Holliday's quote as well. which says, you know, a significant aspect of Western discourse is that subscribers are not even aware of its negative and other features. Part of it, the innocence is subscribers, is the definite belief that they're well-wishing and provide genuine support for people from non-Western cultures. So I think that's the other important side of that. But I still want to come back to those, the people who posted on the website at the end of this presentation to pick up another point. So another part of the story that is heartening and I found really encouraging is that there was a response from the community. And what they did is they made an anti-commercial, which responded to the original commercial. So I want to just show the anti-commercial to you now, and hopefully that will be okay. Let's see. I'm going to have to just play through that one through. Let's see. Sorry, just a moment. Okay, I've got it now, just a second. Oops, sorry again. Okay, sorry about that. Here we go.
Mask يلهمك ماسك عام ماسك مياه دكتور عم بكا إحتياج يخاف مال أبتن طيب تاع
Hawan kagu kwaksh yuwa kwembet kaf kabu was not murder. Kujo hajo a pauk no higu the negrep epshudu ong ha farm gidi ha ha mi di yukuan ha pauk no.
Ga ich te pau pau hane i zu shik shumo tip som sha na mai ha fikir
Kuanum bokum ayuka yachten. Het kuamu knechten na ida na ijehtiande.
Ja wachqueen ik op hitnya maar de opsna as a watsna
Dr. Collins, you have 2 more minutes, okay? Thank
Okay,
you.
fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so really heartening, I think, that this response was made. And some of the key points to come out of that was pointing out the structural inequalities that exist. 2.8 million indigenous Mexico had no access to health services in 2012. A third of Oaxacan population does not have access to piped drinking water. Particular focus on the consumption of sugary drinks, in the case of diabetes 2 in the indigenous population. And they make the point that to remain united, we must protect dignity, health, and culture. And then the final line, in Oaxaca, we drink tejate, tea, and clean water. So again, I think for me, this really demonstrates that even though the community is marginalized, it also has agency, and it resists its positioning in the commercial. And it challenges its positioning, but it goes further by highlighting the structural inequalities that exist for them. So I'm really about out of time, but I wanted to kind of pick up on, I think, what I saw as the dangers of how interculturality can kind of be co-opted in the same way that social justice is really, I think, being co-opted by the Coca-Cola advertisement. Perhaps we can do this in the questions as well. But I also thinking about the posters in the Asian Republican website as well. I'm a little bit worried about this possibility of intercultural dialogue, particularly in our current age where there's such polarized politics. So I was really inspired by Dr. Valencia's keynote speech, which talked about intercultural dialogue. And I think the conference offers some encouragement. But I'm also worried that if I tried to get on this particular website and explain why I saw this commercial as objectionable, I'm not sure that I would be able to have this kind of intercultural dialogue that I would be hoping for. So I'll stop there, and we'll see if we've got any questions.
Wonderful, Dr. Collins. Thank you very much. I think it's extremely important, this perception of your sharing with us here, because the necessity to make this dialogue happen, okay, in particular in our classrooms, because in spite of the potential good intentionality of this kind of commercials, there is something far beyond going on there. And well, thank you very much. So if there's any question from anyone, you could use the chat box, or you could use your microphones. Feel free to do it and ask Dr. Collins any questions. Okay, so Corinne, go ahead, please.
Hi, thanks, Haynes. That was really interesting, and it was a video that I hadn't seen before, so it was good to see that and get a sense of what you were talking about. I was just wondering if maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on what you think is new, like what's changed now. I mean, you started to talk a little bit about it with the website and the comments that people had left there. But I mean, I could give you examples from the 1920s of companies using youth culture to try and erroneously sell products, and somehow claiming this was like a counterculture type thing. So maybe if you could elaborate there a bit on, yeah, what's changed.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it may be in terms of one of the things I think for me, I mean, I obviously wasn't alive in the 1920s, so it's difficult to go back and make a comparison. But I think it's the quantity is one thing that's changed for me, and I think it's in both good ways and bad ways. It's the ability for these kind of messages and these images to move so freely from place to place. And when there's advertisements like we've seen today, I think that can have negative connotations and negative consequences. But I think it also then offers up possibilities to see how these different messages are being received differently in different places, particularly critically. And I think it allows for this opportunity for people to say, well, wait a minute, this kind of message is something that I just don't accept.
Okay, wonderful. We have a message from Ramsey in the chat box. Okay, so it's very difficult to counter soft essentialism or neo-essentialist discourses that become on the diversity and global citizenship discourses. these discourses usually perpetuate the very West as a steward issue that we aim to counter, but in many cases, these ads go unnoticed. Very eye-opening presentation, Haynes. Thanks. Thank you, Ramsey.
Thank you, Ramsey. Yes, thank you.
Dr. Collins, you still have 7 minutes. If you want to point out something else, just feel free to do it.
Okay, thanks. I should have slowed down then. I was kind of rushing to the end. Yeah, that's fine. Well, I will point out. So in kind of investigating this and reading more and more about it, I think the more I read, the more I started thinking about my own positioning and my own response to the ad. And I found it's in the references. I found this one post by a linguist who had been working in the community. And I was really surprised by his personal response, because he was kind of sitting on the fence about this ad. And I kind of couldn't believe it. And that's another aspect about this particular ad, is when I see responses like from the Asian Republican website of people who are just not able to see why it could be problematic, I'm surprised. And then when I found this academic's response, it made me think, okay, I need to just not sort of put a full stop on my own viewpoint. I need to kind of be open. And because he had lived there, he was able to kind of say a little bit more about the situation which led up to the ad, in terms of some of the community members being paid. There was a disagreement among the community members in terms of, whether the ad should be made or not. So I think it shifted my view a little bit. I still find it problematic. I still find it offensive, but I think it throws me back to this idea of intercultural dialogue. I think you've got to be at least willing to listen and open. And that's why I'm a little bit, I think, pessimistic about some of the things I see today, particularly when we've got social media and echo chambers, where there doesn't seem to be a lot of listening. I think people have these sort of preconceived categories. Once they have that category in their mind, there's no possibility of dialogue. So I think that's just a really difficult challenge that I don't see as, one that's easily overcome. But I don't know, perhaps this week in the conference, somebody will have some really good ideas about, how can intercultural dialogue work in really difficult environments.
Wonderful. Thank you, Doctor. Emilia, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you so much. So I want to confess my personal interest that long before I was a university English teacher, I was a waitress in Los Angeles and worked with a lot of Mije speakers who have to leave Oaxaca, walk across the border to the States. And so when I saw your presentation, that was sort of it was like the first time I had seen the language pop up in my circle of academia. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering, do you know so you mentioned a little bit the different opinions. Do you know when this was shared to sort of, what circles on the web shared it, and did it have a lot of, was it shared through other indigenous groups of other languages? Or did it kind of take, who ended up being perhaps the target audience? Who made it go viral, or sort of within the community and outside of the community, if you have any comments on that?
Yes, well, I mean, I think one thing to mention, and I think because I rushed through things, so I think in 2015 as well, I think maybe the sort of the print media was more kind of I think powerful in terms of their distribution. So that's how I kind of came across the ad, was reading responses from newspapers, I think Spanish newspapers. That's where I first saw it. But the response was large enough for for Coca-Cola Mexico to say, okay, we're sorry, we're pulling the ad. So that's one thing that I failed to mention, and I think that was really, really important. So I think within the community, following the linguist that I read, there was some disagreement within the community, but there was enough unease to say, let's unite with this group, the Alliance for Healthy Food, and to make another commercial and to resist. So I think at the time it was getting a lot of social coverage, both in kind of media coverage and academics doing blog posts, and then also things like more right-wing websites were picking up on it to say, there's nothing wrong here. I don't know if that's answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for questions. Dr. Collins, thank you very much again for your presentation. I found it extremely interesting personally, and I guess most all of us did. So we're gonna move on, all right, to our next presentation. But before we move on, I would appreciate if anyone can share your cameras, turn on your cameras for a little while, just to send a record of our participation here. Thank you. Okay, and well, so we're gonna move on. So, well, it's gonna be my pleasure to introduce the next presenter. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so, well, now we're gonna begin with the presentation called Assessing the Level of Intercultural Communicative Competence, ICC, of Saudi students undertaking degrees in linguistics and language studies. And our presenter will be Dr. Amjad Al-Mashal from Newcastle University, whose research interest is applied linguistics and intercultural communication. So Dr. Al-Mashal, you have 20 minutes for your presentation, and then we'll have 10 more minutes for a question round. And well, you can get started. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the brief introduction. And thank you for everyone for listening. And I hope that I can make, let's say, get benefit from this presentation. So today I'm going to present the qualitative part of my findings of my PhD. So actually it's about assessing the level of intercultural communicative competence of Saudi students undertaking degrees in language and linguistics. So it's a comparative design study as I compared between two groups of participants. One studied abroad in the UK and another one studied at home, to see whether the studying abroad had an impact on their level of ICC or not. So actually this study, as it deals only with English language and linguistics students, they were qualified to be English teachers in the future. So the main aim to examine their readiness to teach English in a way that it's suitable for a globalized world. So we are assessing their level to see whether if they are ready to teach English in the coming future in a way that it's suitable for the globalized world. So the first aspect that we dealt with in this study is learning English is no longer focused on obtaining linguistic and communicative competencies. However, there is another competence which is very important these days, which is intercultural competence. So the second aspect, which is studying abroad, actually, it's a good opportunity that prepares students to be effective, competitive communicators in the globalized world. And the third aspect that we dealt with, which is measuring and monitoring aspiring English teachers' level of ICC in a study abroad context, and to compare that with another group who didn't study abroad. Okay, so actually the participants of our study, we have 8 participants from each group, and they're all doing master's degree in English language and linguistics. We had 8 participants from the KSA group and 8 participants from the UK group, and they both Saudis, both relatively the same age, they're in their 20s, and they both doing the same degree. So yeah, this is like a brief description about their demographics and information about them. So now here we have the data collection process. So as we had to track and monitor the level of intercultural communicative competence throughout the term, we collected the data twice, at the beginning and at the end of the academic year. So we collected the data around September, and this is the first round of data collection. So at the beginning of the term, then we had another round of data collection, and it was in June, just during the lockdown, and it was relatively at the end of the academic term. Okay, so and as we are dealing with intercultural communicative competence, and we have to see whether if there is any changes, or let's say development in the ICC. So we use this model, DMIS, which is Developmental Model of Intercultural Sensitivity. And it was actually proposed by Pennant in 1993. And actually it was developed based on observations of reactions of cultural differences. And actually Bennett actually saw this model as, or saw the intercultural competence as a developmental process that can change over time. So that's why we adapted this theoretical framework. So actually we designed our, let's say, I designed the interviews questions based on this model. So actually Bennett believes that individual would go through stages in order to be intercultural competent, or what he called it, intercultural mediator. So the first stage, actually there are two main stages. Ethnocentrism is the first one, and the second one is ethno-relativism. So the first one includes denial, defense, minimization. So in which the individual would go from denial to defense to minimization. Then after that, ethno-relativism, in which the individual would care about other people and other cultures. So we have acceptance, adaptation, and finally the individual would go to the last stage of intercultural communicative competence, which is integration. And it means that an individual's experience of self is expanded to include the movement in and out of different cultures. And we're going to know more about that in details in the coming slides. So actually, because we need to track and monitor the developmental process of their ICC or their intercultural communicative competence, we put the answers or the output of the participants in a scale of high, middle, and low, depending on their answers. For example, here, for the denial stage, participants are not interested in cultural differences and could care less about people other than the ones that are in their own culture. So according to their answers, we classified them according to high, middle, and low. So for example, for low, people, or let's say participant, prefers their friends to be from their own culture or from their own nationalities, even their close ones. For example, here we have an example from the interviews. So cultural background is not something that I look for when I make friends. So which means that this participant, for example, doesn't mind having people or friends from different culture and nationalities. While here, high, people tend to considerably care about similarities with others and deny any other differences. For example, as long as we all speak the same language, there is no problem. And this is the same thing with other stages. So we classified the answers according to certain degree, according to the participants' responses. So the data we had here, so for the denial, as we have, first of all, we had, as I mentioned before, we have two groups and we have two rounds of data collection. So we have UK and we have here KSA for time 1 and time 2. Okay, so for the denial, as we mentioned before, it's defined as individuals' disinterest in cultural differences and their tendency to care less about people other than the ones who belong to their own culture. So here, for example, for time 1, we had only one participant from the UK group reported high level of denial, while for the KSA group, we had the same as well. But at time 2, we didn't see any participants reported high level of denial, but it wasn't the same for the KSA. So both groups tended to acknowledge diverse others' differences at time 1, but this acknowledgement was higher among the UK group at time 2. So regarding defense is defined as an individual's sense of exaltation to their own culture and denigration of other. So the findings we had here is that the UK group was higher in their exhalation to their own nationalities and culture at time 1. We had here three participants reported high level of defense. And for the KSA group, we didn't have any. But that high level of defense decreased by the end of the term among both groups. Regarding minimization is defined as individuals' inclination to find commonalities between themselves and people of other cultures. So here we had the UK group was higher in their minimization at time 1, but lower at time 2. So here we had 2 participants reported high level of minimization at time 1, but this decreased by time 2. And what it happened the other side, when it happened the opposite, I mean, because we had here 1 participant reported high level of minimization at time 1 for the KSA group, and 2 participants at time 2 reported high levels of minimization. So moving now to talk about the ethno relativism stages, which include acceptance. So here it seems that the UK group remain higher in the acceptance level at both times, at time 1 and 2. But it wasn't the same for the KSA group, as we have half of them reported high level of acceptance, but for half of them, they didn't report, low level of acceptance. So what do we mean by acceptance first? Individuals' tendency to accept or to recognize and appreciate cultural differences, but it doesn't involve any actions. It's all about acceptance. So, and we discussed the findings of this stage together. So regarding adaptation, and actually it's defined as individuals' inclination to see the world through the eyes of others. It's actually can be defined as the behavioral manifestation of cultural empathy, as the participant would have this sense of cultural empathy, but this adaptation can be the behavioral manifestation of the cultural empathy to see how much they cultural empathetic. So here, what do we have? 6 out of 8 participants from the UK group reported high level of adaptation, but that number increased to be, we can say, 7 out of 8 participants reported high level of adaptation, which means that they all acknowledged the importance of adaptation and changing their behaviors, their opinions, in order to be suitable to the intercultural environment or setting. While for the KSA group, it relatively remained the same, because we have 4 out of 8 for time 1 and the same for time 2, which means no changes happened to their level of adaptation. So, and that would indicate that studying abroad actually and being surrounded with people from different cultural backgrounds and different nationalities would increase the level of intercultural competence. So finally, we have the integration, which was the most challenging stage to measure, because it was difficult to measure this stage because it requires a longer time to assess. And most of the participants actually reported that at the same time, because they said they didn't have enough time to do their work, their study, and to show some kind of integration. So most of them reported that they felt that they were part of that context. They tried to show some tendency. So here it's defined actually integration, individuals' tendency to be not sensitive to many different cultures, but rather in the process of becoming part of a given context. So it remained low actually at time 1 among both groups. It increased among the UK group at time 2. So here we had only 2 participants out of 8 reported high level of integration and their sense of being suitable and appropriate in that context. While at time 2, we had 4 out of 8 participants reported a high level of integration, while it remained relatively the same for the KSA group. So, and that actually would confirm and contributed to the field of intercultural communicative competence, that study abroad, and the impact of studying abroad shouldn't be neglected, because it helped and promoted the level of intercultural competence of the participants. although that this process, it would require time to maintain, and but still it had a positive impact on the participants. So to conclude, we have some comments on Pennant's model. As we utilized this model, it was actually expected that, as described by Pennant himself, the individual would go through stages from one stage to another, which I mean from denial to defense, and from defense to minimization. But what happened to the data that we had, what happened to the participants, is that it wasn't as the way that he described it, because the participants actually they went through all the stages but in different degrees. So and something interesting actually to discuss is that it's worth actually assessing the level of intercultural competence of the participant after they're coming back, or let's say returning back to Saudi Arabia, to see whether the level of intercultural competence has changed or it remained at the same level. So thank you for listening, and I'm more than happy to have to see your questions and suggestions or comments, feedback, or anything about the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Al-Mishal. Yes, we have a question here from Yukia, and it says, thank you so much for this interesting presentation. I just wonder if you would like to share some assessments to evaluate participants' intercultural sensitivity, as did you use the DMIS for the interview and analyze their competence, and if you have used other models inspired by Bennett's theory.
So I didn't actually. What are the? She said that what are the instances? Or what's the question? Sorry.
Yeah, we have here. Well, there are like two questions here. If you have, yeah, I guess we're asking here for if you have any samples of the questions or the service that you implemented. Yeah, like the sources that you use to assess the participants' attitudes.
Yeah. Actually, as I utilized the Pennant's model, so the questions actually were based on the stages. Like for example, here, denial. I did ask the participants whether if they accept or they prefer to have friends from different cultures background, or they prefer to have friends from their own culture. And this is the same actually happened with each stage. According to the definition of each stage, I designed an interview question that matched this stage. For example, for the defense, for example, some participants would say, and actually not would say, actually they said that their culture is the best over other cultures. And yeah, and this is the same thing actually with the other stages. And I hope that makes it clear.
All right. Okay, perfect. Thank you. And in the same question, Yukiel asked if you had a chance to use other models inspired by Bennett's theory, or you just focused on this one.
Yeah, actually, I used my PhD project was a mixed method design study. So the qualitative part, I used DMIS to measure ICC, and I use another tool for the quantitative part, which is the MPQ, which is Multicultural Personality Questionnaire, which was designed by Binderzy, which is the short version in 2013. So I used two tools to assess the level of ICC of the participants.
Okay, wonderful. And we have another question here from Nadia. And Nadia asked if you consider that DMIS as a similar construct to as ICC.
Yeah.
Do you consider DMIS as a similar construct as ICC?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because actually ICC is considered as the actual, let's say, it deals more with the behavioral dimension of the intercultural sensitivity. So intercultural sensitivity is, let's say, it's the cognitive aspect of intercultural competence.
Wonderful. Yeah, I thank you very much, Dr. Mashal. I actually found it very, very useful for my own experience too. I had the opportunity to work here and lead a bachelor's degree program in Colombia to form English teacher as well. And there were some aspects I didn't really know this model, so I found it quite complete. Okay, so I'm going to take it into consideration for further studies, definitely. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your listening.
All right, you still have some minutes. Is there anything else you would like to point out about your experience, your process here?
To be honest, no, but if you have any questions or any feedback or anything that you would suggest.
Okay, is there anyone to provide any feedback or any support here? Please feel free to participate through your microphones or through the chat box. Otherwise, we can move on.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Okay,
then.
perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Wonderful. So, well, I can see that our next presenters are already here. So, Doctors Moala. Okay, we have Amelia. We have something here. Okay, Dr. Collins and Amelia. Well, you're sharing here your congratulations and thanks for the presentation. Okay, so we're getting ready for the next presentation then. All right, so just give me a second, please, and I will introduce our next presenters. Okay, so well, our next presentation, it's called National Voices and Global Voices in Tunisian Educational Discourses. And I'm glad to introduce to Drs. Asma Moala and Nadia Abai from the Faculty of Letters and Humanities of SFX Tunisia. And well, you can see their research interest here on the screen: intercultural communication and pragmatism and humor by in the part of Dr. Moala. And from Dr. Abai, we have intercultural language learning, textbook evaluation, and identity. So it's a pleasure to have you here, professors, and you can get started with your presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So can I share my my screen? So can you see my screen? Okay, good.
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. So our presentation, let's say good evening here from Tunisia. So our presentation is local voices and the global voices in Tunisian education discourses. Actually, so this presentation is a report on the evaluation of Tunisian educational discourses, or official Tunisian educational discourses, in terms of their conceptualization of language, culture, and identity. So the purpose is to determine whether they are nationally oriented, globally oriented, or both. And or by this evaluation is to really see whether those educational discourses can be or can respond to the needs of our students. I mean, so especially in terms of global skills and attitudes. Okay, so the general context of this study actually, so there are two elements here in the general context. So the first one is a globalization, and so we know that So globalization is, when we say globalization, we talk about economic globalization and social globalization. Also, we talk about information communication technologies that are developed, and also we've got the now people participate in international organizations, and we've got also large waves of immigrants today. We've got high mobility. Societies have become interconnected. They have become heterogeneous and localized. Even now, identities or global identities nowadays have become heterogeneous, and we cannot actually talk about something called, let's say, we can't talk about national identities, but even the national identity itself is questioned. So this element of globalization. So there is another element with this with this general context of the study, is a paradigm shift in linguistics from structuralism to post-structuralism. So this paradigm shift, of course, is going to be discussing the view of language, culture, and identity. So in a structuralism, so language is seen as a system of interrelated signs. So the sign and its meaning are static. The context does not have any importance in the interpretation and understanding of the meaning. In the post-structuralist tradition, language is a social practice, is a social and cultural practice. Meaning is context dependent. It is created, understood, and interpreted in particular context by individuals and groups. The view of culture. So culture is seen by the structuralist tradition as a stable and a static value system. It is bounded, geographically bounded. It means so it is bounded by the boundaries of the nation state. So it is homogeneous. Whereas in the post-structuralist tradition, so culture is fluid, it is dynamic, it is neither homogeneous nor geographically bounded entity. Identity, just like language and culture, of course, because they are interrelated. So in structuralism, identity is nationally bounded. When we say nationally bounded, it means so. We talk about one language for a nation. It is symbol. Let's say it is when we say one nation, it means there is one language and one culture and one identity. And this is a purely essentialized view of identity. Whereas in the post-structuralist tradition, so identity is liquid. It is dynamic and ever evolving and changing. And individuals have multiple identities that they acquire as a result of belonging to different groups and to different social groups. And as our Saudi colleague said, it can be also due to different transnational or intercultural experiences that they have. That paradigm shift in linguistics has an influence on English language teaching in the world and also in Tunisia. So the same thing as part of the world. So in the 1970s and 1980s, the structural approach dominated foreign language teaching and namely English language teaching. So language is taught as a system and culture is a mere context where that language system is taught. The native speaker is a model to follow, and culture is that plays the role of the context. So the culture as a context here, it is the culture of the native speaker, mainly British or American or any country that is within the inner circle. So in the 1980s and 1990s, so with the advent of communicative language teaching, so language is seen or is taught as communication. And so in the class and the teaching materials, we've got interactions between native speakers and not native speakers who are usually members of the learners community or learners country or learners culture. The focus of language is on the language teaching, on the appropriate use of language in appropriate social context. However, so CLT was criticized for teaching the culture of a particular country. I mean, so that nationalist view of culture which does not really consider the internal diversity of societies. So it focuses mainly on the idealized monolingual and monocultural speaker. So that's why intercultural educationists really found that so that notion of the place of culture in CLT is really like an obstacle to intercultural communication, or to teaching students or for English language learners, teach them how to communicate interculturally. So they find it really important to integrate culture in teaching foreign language, instead of promoting communicative competence. So they focus on the promotion of intercultural communicative competence, and they also promote the intercultural speaker as a model for foreign language teaching. So culture within this, then the intercultural term, as they call it, is considered as an action and not an object. Language is constantly is open, it is dynamic, it is interactionally grounded. Cramsch talks about the symbolic competence. Here it means teaching the language with language, and negotiating actually the use of language within its cultural context. And then we find the notion of identity. So identity is no longer the essential, it's not the national culture, but it is, identity, but it is an intercultural identity that is open, that is multiple, that is tolerant. Cramsch also gives another label for intercultural identity, which is a third place. So this is a further development of intercultural language learning, or the development of intercultural communicative competence. It is the notion or the construct of intercultural citizenship, and the UNESCO call it a global citizenship, really, so we can use them interchangeably. And this is, so the intercultural citizenship education, or global citizenship education, were encouraged because, given the role of the intercultural language learning in preparing learners for intercultural communication and connecting people and cultures, and also considering the relevant role of global education in really understanding and solving global issues and global problems. So we are going to see now the place of the Tunisian context actually within this discussion, or this debate over the global and the national dimension of foreign language teaching. So Tunisia, as you can see, I don't know whether you know it or you know where it is or not. So this is a small country in North Africa. It is bordered by Algeria and Libya. It is in the south of the Mediterranean. So English in Tunisia is taught as a foreign language. It is a compulsory subject from primary school to fourth form secondary school. It means our students learn it for about 10 years. So the methods used in the 16th, 70s, and 80s, it is the audiolingual method. I mean, so the structural approach is there. And from the 1990s till now, so we used of CLT, of course. Although communicative language teaching is being used now in the Tunisian context, but however, the research in applied linguistics dealt with or gave importance to the global dimension in English language teaching, and the debate also, and has given importance to the debate over the views of language and cultural identity in a globalized world. So you've got here, so in this table, so I'm going to summarize, I mean, so the results of those studies that were, or articles, some of them articles which are published. In one of them is in the intercultural, in the language and intercultural communication journal, and one is a PhD dissertation. So, but the idea is that most of the micro discourses, I mean, education micro discourses, or the textbooks, which are textbooks in Tunisia, they focus more on the discourses of homogeneity. They gave an essentialist view of culture and idealism, which is, when we say essentialist view of culture, so that was apparent in the overrepresentation of the target language culture, mainly the British culture, and the let's say, the presence of the British person as the interactant in the most of the conversations and the dialogues in the textbooks. So the language, of course, is it is an idealized view of language, and there is emphasis on the native speaker as a model. So this study then is not going to focus on the macro discourses, the textbooks, but is going to focus on the macro discourses, namely the Education Act of 2002 in Tunisia, and also the official English language programs. Okay, they will be analyzed in terms of the culture, in terms of their views or conceptualization of culture, language, and identity, in order to determine whether they are nationally oriented or globally oriented. So the methods used. We have used critical discourse analysis to analyze the Education Act of 2002 and the critical discourse analysis and content analysis in order to analyze the English programs for basic, secondary, and primary educations. Okay, so I'll leave the floor to Asma.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nadia. Hello, everybody. So now we're going to apply the critical discourse analysis tools in order to understand the underlying composition of education policy discourse. So, okay. Yeah, so the overarching objective is to evaluate the extent to which the discourse of voices in Tunisian educational policy are nationally or globally oriented. And in order to achieve this, we're going to analyze the way the text is structured to ensure particular interpretations and to understand the relationship between the formal features of text and their social functions. And this is an attempt to answer the main question: do the discursive voices maintain a national or global orientation? Now, a very important step to adopting CDA is first to determine the genre, because the genre of the discourse has specific features, and these features can influence the way we're going to do the analysis and interpret the data. So in education policy, we have policymakers crafting codes and rules and transmitting them to the audience who are going to be policy, like consumers of these policies. And so these rules are going to define how we are going to act and which rules we're going to abide by. So here in this study, we're going to consider these education policies as amalgam of different discursive voices that are going to position the way we envisage and perceive language learning and education, and we're going to treat them in terms of three major elements. First, the view of language, like is language perceived as a way to understand structure, or is it rather a way to communicate with people beyond the national and geographical boundaries? Second, the view of culture, is it rather bound to time and space, or is it connected to diverse contexts? And finally, the view of identity, is it perceived as belonging to the world or just to the nation? So let's start with the view of language, and we'll start with the first, like with the assumptions that in clauses and educational policies, rules are layered on top of one another, containing some information units. These information units are divided into themes and dreams. Generally, the theme is the given information, the old, like long established rules and goals, and the dream, here the new information or like the details that are newly introduced in the clauses. So we believe that the structuring of these information can contribute to the understanding of the way education or languages are perceived. So let's now have a look at one example from the Educational Act. Here it states that Arabic should be taught in all educational stages to achieve high proficiency. This enables learners to deal with it as a means of communication and cultural knowledge, and to use it in terms of knowledge and production. Foreign languages are taught since the first stage of education as a means of communication and direct discovery of the products of the human mind, such as technology, scientific techniques, theories, and cultural values, which prepares the youth to cope with and participate in the development of these fields and to enrich national culture. So here we can see how the theme and the rhyme are layered so that to introduce new meanings in the clause. So through this figure, we see the clauses divided into units of information. The first unit of information, just given information like known and obvious. Arabic is a national language. It is taught in all stages. We use it to communicate, we use it to develop knowledge, and we use it to produce knowledge. So these like details are known for all Tunisians, and we just make sure to start with them and then ensure a smooth movement or linkage to the rhyme, where we're going to introduce new layers of meaning related to foreign languages and the roles assigned to teaching foreign languages. So foreign languages are taught as a means of direct discovery of technology, science, theories, and cultural values. So here we can see how the underlying, how focusing on Arabic as a national language is a long established goal. And it presents information or a privileged common sense status or information that is common to all Tunisians and known for to most of them. And then we link new information to the given to make this new information natural and familiar. So here we started with Arabic as an identity marker, and then we moved to teaching foreign languages, which is just more of an instrumental use of language. We can use from we can see from the figure here that we have reference to technology, scientific techniques, cultural values, and theories. We can see how the use of foreign languages is just restricted to its instrumental use. And even cultural values is delegated to a later stage or like not given priority. And all of these aspects should contribute and participate in the development and enrichment of national culture. So we can see that there is a bias towards a national view of the language. Now we're going to move on to the view of culture. And this is another principle from the English program stating that as a means of communication, English will foster learners' self-expression as well as appropriate interaction with peers and other interlocutors, which in turn will ensure access to universal culture through Anglophone contexts. So again, if we try to break down the clause in terms of the information, the new information and the given information, we can see that most of the elements are related to self-expression, appropriate interaction with peers, which means like it's still restricted in the structural aspect, language and culture just as a system. And then we have reference to universal culture, like just English as being owned by native speakers located in the United States or the United Kingdom. So very little reference to the harmonious coexistence of people and their openness towards other cultures. So the underlying interpretation of this structural role just relies on how culture is viewed as bound in time and space, and that there is no focus on diversity and connectedness to other cultures. The last element is the way identity is viewed and how it belongs to the nation rather than the world. So just like the essentialist monolithic view of the one country, one nation, and one identity. And as an example, we can see like an example from the clause. So education aims at cultivating in students fidelity and loyalty to Tunisia, fostering in them a sense of patriotism and pride of their country, increasing their sense of cultural belonging, developing their sense of national identities in its national, Maghrebian, Arab, Islamic, African, and Mediterranean dimensions, It also aims at fostering the rules that the values that Tunisians share based on valuing science, work, solidarity, tolerance, moderation, and this to ensure national identity. So we can see here the focus on elements related to national identity and the feelings that we can have towards the one nation, like national identity, cultural belonging, cultural identity values. So here we try to again break down the clause into given and new information. We see how the theme introduces elements related to education and its aim at cultivating fidelity and loyalty to Tunisia, and how the new layers of meaning say as an objective fostering values that all Tunisians share, like solidarity or tolerance or moderation. So we could see that the theme is a long established goal that is difficult to resist and push against, and paves the way to introducing new layers of meaning. And here we have the unfamiliar becomes familiar, and this new familiar element revolves around fostering values shared by all Tunisians. So still it's restricted, confined to the national context. We try to analyze the language features used in the article. If we try to focus on the use of verbs, we have more relational verbs, and it's related to the nature of clauses or policy documents, issuing rules and enforcing them, making them privileged. So we don't have really reference to mental verbs or behavioral verbs where we can argue or we can complain or we can question. Also, we have the use of modifiers or pre-modifiers to some nouns like national culture, cultural belonging, cultural identity, national identity, all of these like foregrounding the orientation towards a national view of language, culture, and identity. And then we have repetition of lexical items related to fidelity, loyalty, patriotism, pride. So all of them within the same context of this national view. So we could see here, we could draw conclusions on how Tunisian identity is homogeneous, just like one single country, nation, and identity, how modernity and openness are related to scientific and technological development. So we are open to the other in terms of what we can benefit, what we can have in terms of like the scientific and technological advancements. And so we can easily say there's a strong bias towards nationalism. If now we try to calculate the occurrences of the lexical items used in order to foreground global or national. So we can see that we have 227 lexical items related to national identity in the view of language or to national elements versus just 4 lexical items related to global. In the view of culture, we have 7 versus 17, and in the view of identities, just like 23 versus 33. So very little use of lexical words related to the global aspect or the global orientation. Now, here we also try to extract all the vocabulary words or the lexical categories related to language as a system, and we can have many of them, so many like very frequent, like vocabulary, lexis, grammar, structure, patterns, overemphasized in the clauses and in the principles. Language as a means of communication, also we have related words, but all of them have to deal rather of English as a means of communication to be able to use it in terms of like the structural competence or linguistic competence rather. So, and it's the same for cultural as global or identity as just national. If we try to summarize on a scale of continuum from the national to the global, we could say that most of the elements are related or closer or more towards the national, like national priority, fostering national and cultural belonging, modernity and just quite far away from the global. And so at the level of, at the structural level, or the critical analysis we could have is that there is more orientation towards the national aspect. And now we're going to move to an in-depth analysis of the content of the clauses and the principles.
We have 2 minutes to finish, please.
Yes.
Okay, Josh, I'm going to just summarize the findings of the content analysis that was conducted on three main learning domains, which are knowledge, skills, and attitudes, of course, according to the guidelines, so the Global Education Guidelines of 2012. For the first component, which is knowledge, or the topics in the English language programs. So we find that there is a focus mainly on the topic of the communalities and differences. I mean, so these are topics that are related to everyday life, issues like school life and family life and people's beliefs and emotions, etc. So these are actually issues that are related to communities. Okay, and so there is the programs tend to ignore all the topics that are related to the interconnectedness and the relationship between the communities or between countries, and so there is also undermining of the global issues. In terms of the skills, so most of the skills, if you look at the bottom here of the table, so most of the skills that are developed are those related to language. I mean, so the language skills and the strategies, reading, writing, speaking, and listening, and some skills related to the promotion or development of the linguistic competence, pronunciation, grammar, vocab, etc. So there is no focus on the global skills. In terms of values and attitudes, most of the attitudes are the ones that are related to the sense increasing or raising the sense of social responsibility. Again, so this the sense of belonging and the sense of being responsible for the welfare of the community, the local one more than the global one, and there is no interest actually in developing that sense of belonging to a global community. Okay, so to conclude, so the major objective of this study was to critically analyze the Tunisian English programs and the Education Act to identify the orientation either national or global. So we have used the CDA as an analytical tool. So that use has revealed the nationalist orientation of the Education Act and the English programs, and that was clear in the essentialist conceptualization of language, culture, and identity. So these results are confirmed by the content analysis of the English programs in terms of knowledge, attitudes, and the skills envisaged, and those are found to be structurally and nationally oriented. So the educational discourse, the Tunisian educational discourse, is invited to raise the learners' awareness of the relationship of the country and their nation, their country with the world, to develop in those students global knowledge, skills, and attitudes, to prepare them for intercultural communication, and also to prepare them to live and act as global citizens. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for your participation. I think it's extremely interesting, yeah, to see how the perception of, and how the influence of policies, national policies, affect the development of our labor regarding language teaching, and well, how the congruence, the coherence between the perception of education from the state and the actual happening in the classrooms and the actual life, well, goes on. So I think this is extremely useful. Thank you very much. Is there any question from any one of the attendees here? You can use your microphones or the chat box just to ask any questions.
Hi, good evening. So I thought it was very interesting, and I was wondering, now that you have your findings, what would you like to happen next, and what do you think can possibly happen next based on your findings and the curriculum?
So Asma, are you going to respond, or
You can do it.
Okay, so what we are going to do next, now as university teachers, so what we can do is just maybe participating in conferences, and so in which we invite high school teachers, because the program that we analyze is a program that that was addressed, or that was designed for secondary and primary school teachers and learners. And in Tunisia, so we university teachers really we do not have that direct relationship with those people who are the practitioners within the primary schools, the secondary schools, and basic educational schools. So maybe one day, so we dream, and I hope that this dream comes true, that we have a kind of committee that combines researchers in applied linguistics or in didactics, and also those people, teacher trainers, for example, or policymakers, or educational policymakers in the country, so that we can share ideas, we share our research findings, and we hope that they can take them into consideration. But the only thing that we can do is that we can participate in those in conferences, in didactics, in applied linguistics, and we can invite our colleagues in the primary education or secondary education, so that they can maybe get help and from the results that we obtained. That's it.
Okay, great. And so I was also wondering, in Tunisia, is there like a system of public schools and private schools for secondary schools? And do they have to follow the same curriculum if there are two? Yeah.
Actually, so most of the schools are public schools. We've got some private schools, but most of them use especially the public schools, they use one curriculum and one textbook for all the students in all the schools in the country. So it is the same for all even the primary, some of the private schools, they use also the same program or the same programs as the state schools or public schools.
I had a question about that precisely. I had the chance to see in your material that you were considering the use of Tunisian EFL textbooks. Is that the one that you used over there is the one using the program by the government, or is it something that you've been thinking on for future development, the creation of Tunisian EFL textbooks?
Could you please repeat the question? So,
yeah, I could see in one of your slides that you mentioned something about having Tunisian EFL textbooks, right?
Yes.
So is this program that you're mentioning, the English program proposed by the government, is that the one using these Tunisian textbooks?
Yes.
All right. And so what's your perception towards the textbooks?
Actually, so the articles that I mentioned, so these are studies that Asma and I actually did, and we worked on most of the Tunisian textbooks that are used and implementing the same programs, actually the findings that we obtained, or the results that we obtained, maybe they can be useful for the teachers and teacher trainers, and again, I don't know whether there are people who in the country who are really reading these articles, or they really can get help from those findings. It's just a matter of policy. I mean, so there should be, as the programs were decided by the Ministry of Education. So we need also politicians in the domain of education to take a decision, to make a decision in order to find that mediator, a committee that is mediating between scientific research or academic research at university and actually so the teacher trainers and people who are responsible for curriculum design and syllabus design. So.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any other question or observation? All right, no, so I think we can call it a day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Smala, bye. Thank you very much.
شكراً
Bye-bye.
جزيلاً
Bye-bye.
Have a nice day.
وجزاء خير.
Okay, take care.